Video broadcast. Greetings, colleagues. I am grateful to the organizers for the invitation to this wonderful conference dedicated to beauty and youth. It is very nice to see colleagues with whom I have been familiar for a long time, to meet my students and even patients in this audience. Therefore, it will be more pleasant for me to share my latest developments, experience, and knowledge in the war now. So, let's get started. And today, I want to tell you not just about some specific thread techniques, there are, of course, a lot of them, namely about my author's system of working with a face using thread implants. These are dynamic techniques that will lead to a gradual transformation of the face towards youth and beauty. I'll start with giving a definition. This is my author's vision and understanding as a practicing specialist. What do thread techniques give us? First of all, it is, of course, a universal tool in our hands. This is an intelligent system, stimulation of multifunctional collagen. This is the main difference between the thread implantology of collagen stimulation with the help of threads from other cosmetic collagen stimulating techniques. In order to create really different aesthetic accents, as well as strengthen the soft tissues of the face. Now network techniques are fully developed, and indeed, their effectiveness has significantly increased. Including in my practical research, also selected the most effective, the most delicious techniques. This is a simplification of technology. It is very important that the technology itself be easily replicated by specialists in order to get its wide distribution. We know that earlier threads were considered something so complicated, traumatic, close to plastic surgery in practice, and only a few practiced them. Now technologies have become much simpler and rehabilitation for patients has also become easier and more comfortable. This has led to the development of the popularity of mesothreads among patients, including due to the fact that they have a sufficiently physiological effect on facial tissues. It is possible to increase the result over a long time and, of course, naturally, thanks to the natural results that they give. And also a minimal risk of undesirable results. It is an opportunity to get beauty without risking anything. And I know that not all cosmetologists still practice the wrong ones. Someone may even have already worked with threads, but they may have encountered some kind of disappointment or misunderstanding. And this is only due to the fact that there is really not enough knowledge, just a specialist has not yet learned how to work with threads. And my task is just to increase the popularity of thread techniques, to make them more accessible to both doctors and patients. What are the main mistakes? I will briefly point this out, because these are very important mental and even marketing moments that relate to thread techniques. I am faced with the fact that doctors do not have a tactical plan for managing patients on threads. That is, thread techniques are perceived as separate procedures that give some results on certain areas of the face, instant effects, but there is no plan for long-term correction. And also my very important practical observation, to which I will devote most of my report, is that the thread techniques do not take into account facial activity and aesthetic reliefs of the face for various threads. So, my conclusion is unequivocal: thread techniques are long-term work with the patient. That is, with the help of various thread models, implants, we form a gradual skeleton of our own collagen in the soft tissues of the face. This, of course, takes some time. In order to fix the face in a more elevated position, to create a high-quality and natural result, it can be achieved only by combining mesothreads, the so-called small thread implants of small size, and thread lifting. That is, you need to master both techniques. And it is important for doctors to know that each scheme and model of threads, it has its own effect. This needs to be sorted out. And the course of network correction should be designed for at least a year, work with the patient in order for it to be effective, and preferably for 3 or 5 years. So, as I said, you can't work with threads blindly. This is a very transparent, logical method. Each scheme, thread model has its own result, it is clearly predictable. There is almost never any result that we did not expect. An important task of a specialist is to familiarize himself with all the techniques designed to obtain various aesthetic results. In my coordinate system of threads, thread techniques are techniques 1D, 2D, 3D, reinforcement, and, of course, thread lifting. And you need to clearly know on which areas of the face for what effect they should be applied. And it is very important that you need to study the correct tactics of sequentially assigning threads to gradually increase the result, to polish it and transform the face towards modern beauty trends and standards of a young face. Well, if we talk about beauty trends, standards of a young face, here I have listed them. We all know them, they're perfectly well. But here the most important thing that I wanted to convey is that a thread implant can handle absolutely every single point. You just need to know where to apply which one. That is, you can fill the temple without using a filler by moving the tissue, emphasize the cheekbones, the angle of the lower jaw. You can form filter columns, reduce the distance between the nose and the upper lip, make the nose more optically thin, and so on. So, mesothreads. They are designed for us to strengthen facial tissues and create soft aesthetic accents. Thread lifting is already bright aesthetic accents, because by moving the fabric from one place to another we can create an almost instant transformation effect, a very bright transformation of the face towards the trends of beauty and youth. That is, some kind of visual rejuvenation. And here it is important to understand that only aesthetic vectors need to be used for the thread lifting. So that the thread lifting makes the face more beautiful, that is, it does not just lift the tissues, but adds beauty and youth. So, I repeat, mesothreads is soft aesthetic accents. Thread lifting is bright aesthetic accents. The results are almost comparable to plastic surgery. And only the synergy of these techniques and the repetition from year to year, as I say, of face stitching according to the same schemes gives us a stable transformation and an increasing result over time. That is why I say that threads are a long-term job, thanks to their collagen-stimulating effect. I expect a course of work with patients for 5 years, and all the patients who come to me, they become permanent. I do not take on separate procedures. When a patient wants to make fox eyes or tighten his chin, I say that I cannot help. Because I work in a long term, I work for the result. We start from the 0 stage. This is our entire arsenal of work with collagen-stimulating techniques to improve the quality of the dermis. Next, we move on to the reinforcement. It is a formation under the skin of this mesh frame of small threads, which in the future will stimulate the formation of collagen. Collagen bundles around themselves. And this is done in 2 or 3 stages. You understand that there are a lot of zones on the face, we can't process everything in one session, so we divide it into 2 or 3 stages. And threads lifting is also done in 2 or 3 stages in the future. For practicing doctors, I will say once again that reinforcement is done before thread lifting. Because after thread lifting, the patient needs to enjoy the result, that transformation, bright aesthetic accents that she received. So, I will tell you about my system of dynamic reinforcement and upward lifting. I will show you absolutely all the schemes, but, of course, this is not training, but you will know that such exists. These are my author's developments, and all these techniques will gradually improve the result. I work with mesothreads and thread lifting, and only by combining these techniques can we really say that we have mastered thread implantology. There are some principles of reinforcement or rules for the use of threads that allow us to distinguish effective schemes from inefficient ones. These are my author's observations, to which I have come, which now explain a lot. The dynamic principle is a very important principle for the safety and durability of the result. And aesthetically, it is important for the quality of the brightness of the effect. I won't talk about the others yet, you can just take a picture of the slide to save a little time. And what are we observing? Of course, our face is a unique multi-layered construction of anatomical structures with various functions. And our expressive facial features are not always individual, they are due to our active facial expressions, facial dynamics. And, of course, the thread implants, having a strict shape, rigidity, physical properties, they must fit into this active mimicry. The movement is very organic and, I would even say, harmonious. In order to strengthen the tissue of the face and give a result that would allow you to maintain this natural mimicry. But we can see from various atlases how high the mobility of the face really is. But I must immediately draw your attention to the fact that I represent this segment of Korean thread implants for lifting. I have been studying very actively for 6 years. I have visited Korea many times, studied this direction. In the future, I began to work myself, to develop techniques. But the main difference between Korean thread implants from those that previously existed and now exist on the market is that the hooks are very much enlarged, and this leads to a very rigid fixation of soft tissues. There are different ones, I have a lot of such photos, but it is clear that you see that these are very large hooks, and it is very important to understand that you cannot introduce such threads that rigidly fix tissues according to dynamic vectors. They need to be introduced according to aesthetic ones. Let me explain what I meant. We have lines on the face of maximum stretching of the skin. They go from the reference zones to the oral cavity. That is, if we look at these pictures, we will understand that these skin lines, they change very much in their size, and of course, this is called a dynamic vector. And rigid fixation on these dynamic vectors is impossible, or ineffective, that is, it will ever limit facial expressions. Accordingly, the opening of the mouth also makes a great contribution to the changes and dynamics of the facial soft tissue. And, of course, this should be taken into consideration. Yes, the buccal area, as well as the lip extension into the tube is actively moving, that is, it is all shown in yellow light. The vector is dynamic. According to them, rigid fixation, thread lifting is not effective. So the question is, then what vectors do we need to trace network implants? Do thread lifting according to aesthetic vectors. What are these vectors? These are vectors opposite to the vectors of tissue displacement in the process of gravitational ptosis. That is, here we see on the first one. Here we see how our tissues are shifting. Here are the three main vectors. And here we see just the vectors along which the tissues should move in the future. That is, here it is already shown by the example of the patient. That is, we see an age transformation, the tissues have shifted, and when we lifted them, we formed volume accents at the corner of the lower jaw, in the cheekbone area, in the temple area, and in the medial part of the face. So, dynamic reinforcement. The last time I was in Baku 5 years ago, it was with this technique. I think that many people practice it. Remember these schemes. I'll tell you a secret, not much has changed since then. This technique has been in such an unshakable form for 5 years. The technique of face lace. Because when I saw these diagrams of mine, I looked and thought, what does it look like? It looks like real lace. Here is such a beautiful intellectual, functional collagen we form with the help of small types of threads. 1D reinforcement to improve the quality of the skin. It is micro threads, very thin and small. 2D reinforcement is flattening with the help of linear threads, that is, the so-called monothreads. Is most often used in the form of flattening grids. Spiral threads or 3D, this is already used to emphasize the volume. There are also thread volumization threads fillers, and there is a thread lifting as we already said. But here it is very important not to confuse, because I know that some doctors or even trainers in those areas where you need to remove the volume introduce threads. For example, spiral, which on the contrary emphasize the volume. Here such a system error can be very important, so you need to familiarize yourself with all this material part. Let's watch the video. We will turn off the sound, I will comment. This is the face lace technique in action. This is a master class recorded for my online school. Doctors learn with these video. And here I show just 2D reinforcement mesh, which I create in the area of the wing. This zone, where just all the volumes flock, and this surplus is formed. So, here we need to flatten the tissues. This can only be done with a grid. If you implement threads in parallel in the form of a single D reinforcement, they will not give results. It's like a fence, which is made of just such sticks, but they will all just fall apart and there will be no stable structure. You always need to create an intersection. Such an aesthetic accent can be obtained right after the correct introduction of threads by the 2D reinforcement technique. You have seen the flattening of the cheek on one side. We also make grids in the area of the second chin, as well as for its flattering. Linear threads are also used either double or mono. And it is very important to create a dynamic intersection here. The main difference between my methods is that mimic activity is taken into account. A dynamic principle that makes the methods safer, that is, there are no undesirable phenomena of thread displacement. All the threads fit very narrowly into the dynamics of the face. That is, you will not feel them and neither will your patients. The threads do not shift and at the same time has a very effective aesthetic result because the frame is formed. The frame that performs the function, in this case, the volume reduction function. As you can see, the patient shows movement, that is, mobility is not limited in any way. And also here will be shown the technique of B-volume, that is, the use of spiral or 3D threads. Different here. This is me showing the so-called super springs. These are such thick springs, polyactic from USP 3.0. You can find them from different manufacturers, or just springs of any diameter, but longer, because just in the lateral parts, where there is no active mimicry, we can use longer threads, which will be used without the risk of contouring and displacement. And we also create stiffening ribs in the nasolabial folds precisely in order to get volume without volume. And this is possible with the help of a thread, that is, with the help of this washing stiffness rib. We are in the facial expressions of the fabric, there, so to speak, sinking is reduced and thus the folds are less pronounced. And, as you can see, after 2 days the patient feels very well. And a little later at the end of the report I will publish a QR code by which you can get this master class completely uncut. Also, my very important observation is when I combine the dynamic and aesthetic principle. I took into consideration the dynamics of the lateral part. There is no active facial expression. Central yes, part or medially more active facial expressions, plus volume zones. The upper third needs volume, the lower third does not need volume. It turned out that these zones have different properties. Therefore, what was my conclusion? I think you understand. Yes, I have already said that the thread is a very logical technique. This means that each zone should have its own scheme. And this is exactly what is shown here. That's what it looks like. Look how beautiful it all is. If we draw this line here, you see yes, here is a frontal projection. Threads are used above to emphasize the volume. Threads are used below to reduce the volume. This scheme is mine. I really like to always talk about this technique, because everyone usually makes threads like this, but you need to do it crosswise. Please take a picture of this scheme, remember it. And tomorrow, you can use it in your office without the risk that the chin will become stronger after reinforcement, but vice versa. Let's move on to lifting. What is the interesting difference and uniqueness of my methods here? The fact that of course these are aesthetic vectors. Here they are. Today there are already 6 of them. And you need to work with all vectors. It is impossible to pull up one without working out the rest, because the result will be incorrect and not stable. Also, I do thread lifting several stages, and the first stage is always a facelift. That is, we never do chin or neck lifting in the first place, always face lifting at the beginning, then everything else. These are vectors, my author's vectors, aesthetic of dynamic lifting so-called, which pass the lateral parts of the face. And for a long time I have been saying that thread lifting is possible only in areas where there is no active facial expressions. But a year ago I myself was very surprised when I developed a lifting technique for the middle third of the face. Vectors are also shown here. A little later I will tell you in more detail at the end of my report. And remember, I said that we should work on the same aesthetic accents. I was given more time. I am very grateful to the organizers, so I am so calmly telling you everything in detail. See how the 2 methods of reinforcement and thread lifting are combined. Here I also have one very important principle or rules of lifting work. That is, this reinforcement, which we carry out before lifting, the first stage, it also prepares the skin for lifting. That is, if we pull the tissues from the bottom up, then these vectors should not be blocked. Therefore, the reinforcement should be across the lifting vectors so that the hooks of the lifting threads have something to cling to. Well, these are the results. I have about 7 different concepts of thread lifting with some life hacks and nuances. This is a technique of love lift for such young active women who do not limit mimicry of the mouth. The full amplitude is preserved. The result will be a little later now. I'll show you the result. Here is also a video, which shows that facial expressions are in no way the dynamics of the face, and the amplitude of opening the mouth is not limited. Many patients are afraid of thread lifting because they know that it is impossible to open their mouths afterwards, that they need to eat with a small spoon for 1 or 2 months. But this has not been the case for a long time, it's all in the past. We can create a rigid fixation and effective lifting without limiting the facial expressions of dynamics. This is the difference from my methods. And again, there is also no thread for lifting in the cheeks, the so-called cogs, because this is a very mobile, dynamic zone. These are the results we get. This is really a very simple technique. We get literally within an hour, doing the procedure. We also need such a result. No special efforts for either the patient or the doctor with certain practices. We restore the natural form that was in our youth. Sometimes patients forget already what kind of face they had, what kind of face they had before, or even the shape of the chin. For example, this is markup. Here you can also see how the reinforcement schemes have been superimposed. That is, here you see the end sections of the claws, they cling to this reinforcing mesh. This is a lifting principle or rules for working with threads. These are the results. Even with a very loose face, even without preliminary preparation, we can more or less harmoniously assemble the tissues. And thanks to the upward dynamic lifting, we get the restoration of the natural form. For faces with a triangular face shape, the aesthetic result will be brighter. With a frontal photo, we see how much the difference is. If the face is more square, maybe the oval of the face will not change so much, but the volumes will change, because we will move the extra volume from the lower third to the cheekbone and temple area. And there will be such an effect of a thinner face. And also we can smooth out the corners of the lower jaw, we can emphasize them. This is again with the help of markup, you can achieve these results. That is, again, we see that without any folds and an uneven system. I have already said that there is a lifting principle. Well, I have already told him a little bit that you need to prepare the skin for thread lifting with reinforcement. Here's a look at more photos of how reinforcement techniques are combined with the vectors of thread lifting. This increases efficiency. It was 2Ds, now I'm showing it 3Ds. Also you see it will be better to cling hooks. And here is such a regular flashing of the face according to the same vectors. It leads to a persistent transformation of the face towards beauty and such fashion trends and a younger face. If you sew the patient with different schemes, visit different seminars, of course, will not have such progress, transformation. Because collagen is produced gradually. Here I have already talked about the lesson of the full version of face lace, my dynamic reinforcement technique. You can scan this QR code, leave your details and get a full lesson, as well as other useful information. You can also subscribe to my freeprof.needy channel in Telegram. That's what he looks like. We also discuss a lot of interesting things on my Instagram and online learning site. There are also a lot of free materials you can study. Well, in the end I have just a couple of minutes left. I'm still going to tell you about my latest innovation. I myself was very surprised when I developed this technique, because I have never seen such a thing anywhere, either in Korea or among colleagues. This is baby face, aesthetic lifting. It consists in the fact that we get a quick effect of such a child's face, youthful, which just allows us to get a bright visual effect of rejuvenation. What is important is not to tighten the skin, to bring it, but to make a woman more beautiful, younger. It is in the active limbic zone that such a thread lifting is possible, because it takes into account both aesthetics and facial dynamics. And this is how the concept looks, that is, we do a temple lifting. We do a perfect lifting or baby face and reinforce the lower third of the face, flattening it. Here. Yes. This is the result. That is, you see, it is formed on one side, yes, on the right side. The result is immediately after, that is, we clearly form this beautiful relief, which, of course, decreases with age. That is, you see, at once it is so bright enough, and then it becomes softer. That is, in fact, we draw new reliefs on the face that make it look younger. Well, you can watch just the video performance. We work extremely naturally and very superficially, literally subcutaneously, at a depth of a maximum of 1 millimeter of subcutaneous fat, always pulling the skin up a little for safety. Thus, we form such a result. And here it is very important that we not only tighten the tissues, form a new relief, we stretch the corner of the mouth. We remove the nasolabial fold. If you stand in front of the mirror and lift your face a little like this, you will see that the nasolabial fold has gone somewhere. That is, we can't practically stretch the nasolabial fold laterally, because facial expressions will pull it off anyway. Therefore, this medial vector, it is in no way invulnerable to mimicry, so to speak. Therefore, so that's it. Thank you very much for your excellent report. Now we invite Artem.